We have to agree with ourselves that it's possible, number one, that God actually exists. Not everyone believes that there is a God. So, of course, you can't have a conversation with God unless you think that God exists. And we also have to believe that it's possible that if God does exist, that God would actually talk to regular human beings, not just the Pope or the chief ulama or the head rabbi or the Archbishop of Canterbury, but that God would talk to, a plumber in Cincinnati or a woman in Portugal. So an ordinary person. So we have to embrace the possibility that God would talk directly to us.
Welcome to New Earth Podcast, where we dive into inspiring stories, profound wisdom, and insights from remarkable individuals who are driving the consciousness shift on our planet. If you're ready to elevate your awareness and well-being, you're in the right place. But before we dive into today's episode, be sure to hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. Together, we'll continue to explore the ideas and conversations that help you up-level your consciousness. Thank you so much for your support and your comments and for being part of this journey. Today, I'm honoured to welcome a truly remarkable guest, Neale Donald Walsch. Neale is the best-selling author of 40 books on spirituality, including the renowned Conversations with God series, with 7 of the 9 books becoming New York Times bestsellers. His work has been translated into 37 languages, inspiring millions worldwide. His latest book, GodTalk, Experiences of Humanity's Connections with a Higher Power, explores how we connect with the divine and continues his mission to explore the practical applications of spirituality in everyday life. We're thrilled to have him with us today and to share his insights and wisdom that has inspired so many. Welcome, Neale.
Thank you, Sarah. Those are very kind words for you to say. And may I offer one small correction? I do not have any wisdom to offer anyone. It is not my wisdom, but I will acknowledge that God's wisdom was shared with me and with all the world through the Conversations with God experience. But I don't want anyone to think that's my wisdom, because I'm actually a pretty dumb person.
You've got a beautiful sense of humour. I've already found that out from the little chat prior to the talk today. Really delighted to have you on the podcast, Neale.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here with you. How may I be of service to you?
I'd love to chat with you about your new book, GodTalk. What inspired you to write this book, and how is it different from other books that you've written?
Well, the big difference for me is that normally when an author has a book that they would like to see out in the world, they go ahead and write it, and then they look for a publisher to try to find someone to publish it. Maybe they might work through a literary agent who does what they call, shop it around to see if they can find, any major publisher who wants to publish it. And that's how it was with my first 39 books. But with book number 40, this one, my telephone rang. For the first time in my life, a publisher actually called me and said, "Mr. Walsch, would you be willing to write a book for us?" Now, that's very rare for a publisher to call a person and say, "Would you write a book for us?" So I said, "Well, I would be happy to. What did you have in mind?" And they said, "Well, we've read all of your Conversations with God books, but the one thing that there is not out there is a book that tells other people how they might have their own conversations with God. Could you write such a book?" I said, "Well, golly, sure. I'll do my best." And I sat down, and Sarah, in 5 weeks, 4.5 weeks, I had written that book. It's not a very big, fat book. It's a nice personal size book, but it's called GodTalk: how to have a talk with God. And I listed 6 steps that I think people could use to have their own personal conversation with God. So that's what makes the book a little bit unusual. Also, what makes it unusual to really give a lengthy answer to your very short question. But what makes the book also unusual, Sarah, is that the publisher put out an invitation on the internet asking people around the world, if you feel that you have had a direct intervention from the divine in your own life, please send us your story. And the publishers called me and said, Neale, we've received hundreds and hundreds of emails from people around the world who say that God has intervened in their life as well. So we've picked out the 8 or 9 of the most interesting stories, and we're going to put them in this book. So what's interesting about the book GodTalk is that the second half of the book contains stories from these people around the world, scientists around the world, a teacher, mothers of children who, there was one story was a mother was receiving advice from her 7-year-old son who was speaking with the wisdom of the divine. And her mother his mother couldn't understand at first what was going on. Then she realized that, oh, I'm being communicated with from a higher source. So that's what makes the book interesting and unusual, Sarah, is that it contains the stories of many other people. And the publisher did this on purpose. They did this deliberately because they didn't want people to think that I'm the only one who experiences God in their life in such a personal and direct way. That all of us are having conversations with God all the time. You know what, sir? We're simply calling them something else. We call our conversations with God an epiphany or a sudden insight. Or we say to other people, I had a psychic hit. Or we even might call it women's intuition. You know, we use whatever words we can use because we don't want to say, God told me this morning, you know, because we don't want to be ridiculed or marginalized or made fun of. But we're all having communications with the divine all the time. As I said, we're simply calling them something else. Well, in my case, I called it what it is, a conversation with God. So that's my 2.5-hour answer to your 30-second question.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And you can keep talking. I'm loving listening. It was so heartwarming, all the different stories that were shared. And I had a little synchronicity in there because my dear friend, Mayor Cromwell, was one of the stories, and I got halfway through it and thought, this sounds like Mayor, and I had to flip to the end of her story and then just to check if it was her, and then went back again. So that was a beautiful synchronicity that felt very much like the alignment of the whole, you know, talking with you about this book as well, to have that beautiful connection.
Oh, I didn't realize that somebody that you know personally had a story in the book.
Yes, my dear friend, Mayor Cromwell. She wrote the story about the gas gauge that stayed on full, and then the ceremony. So it was it was a beautiful synchronicity there. And I guess that's some of the ways that God speaks to us as well, through the synchronicities.
Oh, yes, there's no question, Sarah. You know, the chance meeting that we have with a person on the street, a friend we haven't seen in 5 years, and he just happens to be walking down the sidewalk, and we run into them, and he brings us a very important message, you know, just in casual conversation that turns out to be something that we really needed to hear. Or maybe the lyrics of the next song you hear on the radio. Or it could be an overheard conversation in a coffee shop. In other words, the point is that life is communicating to us. Life is another word for God. God and life communicating to us through the process of life itself all the time.
I
And it's
love
important
that.
for us to stay awake.
And to be aware, and that was the beauty of a lot of the stories. They were sharing those personal experiences, and they were all so different, but they really captured the people noticing, really observing that was what was happening, catching that moment. Would
Yes,
you like to
it's
share one of the stories, Neale?
well, no, I'm not going to share one of those stories. Just I can briefly give you a list of them. There was a scientist whose conversation with the presence of God dramatically changed his life. There was a teacher who received a divine message about how to help her students learn better. But I don't want to give away the story. If people want to read those stories,
Yes.
they're all there in the book, but they're fascinating stories about how God intervenes in the life of all of us all the time. In fact, for all we know, God could be intervening in the lives of people right now by inviting them to wake up through a podcast by a person named Sarah.
Yes, well, it's an interesting journey, what we get called to do, isn't it? For me, this
Yes,
is very much a calling that's quite inexplainable, but I just follow it. There's a love within it, and I just follow that guidance. So that's it is a time where humanity is awakening, and you very much spoke about that, didn't you, towards the end of the book, the awakening of humanity, the process that we're going through at the moment.
yes, it's occurring all over the world. And, it's happening much more rapidly now than it could have happened even 30 or 40 years ago because of the advances that we have made in human technology. I mean, can you imagine 40 years ago when I was your age? I couldn't imagine being on a screen with somebody halfway around the world in
Yeah.
real time and having a conversation like this, where we could visually see each other and be with each other in a high quality way. So we have made such incredible advances that yes, there are changes that are now occurring, and even more that will be occurring in our way of life on this planet because of our technological advances.
It's interesting because we often see technology, as kind of bad development, but there is ultimately no good or bad. I guess it's how we use things and how we relate to things.
That's exactly right, Sarah. A thing is not inherently good or bad, but just as you said, how we use it is what makes things good or bad, whether it's power, money, or sex, or even food, or whatever it might be. So how we use the elements of our life determines whether it produces a good result or a result that's not so good.
So I'm going to segue from this into, because one
Oh
of
my God, did you hear that, folks? She just used the word segue. Now, just a minute, segue. SEGU. What in the world does segue mean? Only a person in the broadcasting business knows what a segue is. Oh, segue is when you move from one thing to another so smoothly that hardly anyone notices. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let's segue.
you had me worried for a minute, Neale, because I do have a tendency of making up words by combining words, and I thought, oh no, please don't let it be one of those. Yeah, so I'm going to segue because I know one of the things that you're kind of known for is going on this breakfast show and being asked about if God has a message, and 5 words coming through, you've got me all wrong. So I got distracted by the segue. I can't remember the connection with what you were saying before. Oh, the inherently good and bad, because it's interesting. Our perception our perception of God, is that influencing the way that we are in our world? By shifting our perception of God, do you feel that this would enable us to have new relationships with ourselves, others, nature, and all that is?
Oh, Sarah, there's no question about it in my mind. If we changed our idea about God, we would change our idea about ourselves. Because most religions tell us that we have been made in the image and likeness of God. Now, if we believe that we have been made in the image and likeness of God, at least at some level, that we are God's creations and so forth, then we're going to behave with each other the way we believe that God behaves with us. And if we think that God loves us, but is also judgmental, condemning, and punishing when God does not get what God wants or what God needs, then we will love each other in the same way. We will say that we love each other, but we will demand that the other person give us what we say that we want or that we need and that we require. And then when they don't, or if they don't, we wind up judging, condemning, and punishing them. This happens between people. It happens between nations. And that's why the world is the way it is today. So if we changed our idea about God, I mean, let me propose a question. God said to me, Neale, what if it turned out that you were wrong about me? What if, in fact, I never judge, condemn, or punish anyone? What if I'm comprised of nothing more than pure love? And what if pure love needs, expects, requires, and demands nothing in return? We can't even imagine the highest power in the universe that we call God being so wonderful. You mean God doesn't need anything to get back from me? I don't have to obey, a whole list of commandments or follow all sorts of rules. Or, what I was told as a child, Sarah, I was 9 years old and I was raised in the Catholic religion. Now, I'm not making the Catholic religion wrong. I'm just sharing a teaching. When I was 9 years old, a priest came into the classroom of my school, and because I was going to a Catholic school, and the priest was teaching us about the difference between mortal sin and venial sin, big sins and small sins. So I raised my 9-year-old hand, I said, Father, could you help me understand what is like a really big sin, a mortal sin? Because a mortal sin was described as a sin which is, if it's not forgiven in confession, and if you should die with that sin on your soul, you go straight to hell. And not just for a couple of months or a couple of bad years, but for the rest of eternity. So I said, well, Father, could you tell me what's a mortal sin? I thought he would say, well, murder or stealing someone's life savings or, something terrible. He said, yes, it's a mortal sin if you miss Mass on Sunday without a good excuse.
Okay.
If you're caring for a sick parent, fair enough. Or if you're a man who has to work on Sunday to support his family, okay. But if you just happen to run into a friend that you haven't seen in 20 years, and he said, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just ran into you. Let's go have brunch. Let's do something. We need to get connected again. And you go off and miss Mass that Sunday. And if you don't go to confession and have that sin removed from your soul by the Catholic, process called confession.
Yes.
And if you don't do that, or even if you're on your way to confession and you get hit by a car and die in the street, you're going to go to hell for missing church one Sunday of your life. without a good excuse. And I thought when the priest told me this, no, that can't be what a God of love would do.
Yeah.
And so, but it isn't just, if I could just go on a bit, the Catholic Church, because you said you love to hear me talk, so I'm going to go on forever.
Please do.
But I want to make sure that people understand it's not just the Catholic Church. I'm not here to be a Catholic basher. I'm not bashing the Catholic Church. Every religion has all of their rules. I know there's another religion that says that if you're a female, you must never let your hair be seen in public. So if you belong to that religion, Sarah, you're in big trouble because we can see your hair. And you have to wear a garment that covers your hair and even covers your face, and you only can see out of a little slit so you can see where you're going. Oh, and speaking of going places, you can't leave your house unless you're accompanied by a male relative. This is the law of that particular religion. And then there's another religion, a third religion that says that if you eat the wrong kind of meat, you're in trouble with God. You can't eat any pork because pork is forbidden by this particular religion. So we believe, my point is, Sarah, we believe in a God who is so frankly trivial and who needs us to behave in certain ways in order for him to be happy. And if we misbehave, we're going to pay for it. And that's the God that religions want us to believe in. By the way, how many religions do you think there are on earth?
I'm not sure, actually. How many are there?
4,223.
Is that right?
Yes, you can just Google it.
Oh,
How many
goodness.
religions on the face of the earth? 4,223 religions now being practiced on our planet.
And what you seem to be talking about in this shift in the perception of God is the shift from fear, control, and division, separation into love, or as you say in your book, pure love. And you mentioned earlier that some people dismiss the conversations because they don't want to be kind of perceived as crazy, saying, oh, I'm just having this conversation with God. You must have been very brave initially, because I know I read about how your first conversation came about, when you were having a really difficult time. You started writing a letter, which then turned into this conversation with God. You wrote a letter to God, but then turned into a conversation. It was a private conversation. So you must have been extremely courageous, Neale, to kind of put that out to the world. And I bet you never believed that it would be read by millions as it was.
Well, thank you. Those are nice words to say. But to be honest, it didn't take much courage for the very reason that you said. It didn't take much courage because I frankly thought, number one, no one's going to publish it. I mean, who would publish a book because a guy says he's talking to God? No publisher is going to put the book out. But you know why I did it? Because you're right. It started out as a very private, personal experience. Just me. And I was writing this letter to God, trying to understand why everything was going so badly in my life. But in the middle of my conversation, which was a written question, then an answer, a written question, then an answer. I wasn't expecting to get answers, but I started hearing answers in my head. So I kept on asking other questions and got other answers. Question, answer, question, answer. And before I knew it, I had an on paper, handwritten dialogue, or if you please, conversation with God. Now, in the conversation, God said to me, Neale, you will make of this one day a book, and it will be accessed by many people. And you know what I thought? That's not going to happen. Like I said a minute ago, nobody's going to publish a book because a man claims to be having a conversation with God. Nobody's going to publish a book like I could just see the publisher running out to the workroom floor saying to all of his editors, hold the presses, stop everything. I got a guy here who's talking to God. It's not going to happen. So you know what? It didn't take any courage. I sent my handwritten notes to a publisher on a dare. I was daring. I was daring God. I said, okay, you said it'll be a book. Show me.
Wow.
And you know what happened? 4 or 5 weeks after I sent the book, it wasn't a book, but my handwritten notes to a publisher, my phone rang. And the publisher said, we want to publish this material. I couldn't believe it, Sarah. I said, you're kidding me. They said, no, it's a great work of fiction about a guy who has an ongoing argument with God. I said, whoa, wait a minute. You're not publishing it as a book of fiction. This is not a fictional story. Yeah. And the publisher said to me, Mr. Walsch, are you telling me you think this actually happened to you? I said, yes, of course. It's happening to everyone. I simply kept notes of my interaction. And the publisher said, well, okay, we'll put it out, but we'll put it out as a nonfiction book, but it's not going to find 500 readers because nobody's going to buy a book because some guy in Oregon claims to be talking to God. You'll be lucky if you find 500 readers. But they put the book out and he was right. He hit the nail on the head. He was right. The book did not find 500 readers. It found 5 million. Not bragging, just saying. 5 million readers in 37 languages. And that was 30 years ago. Now it's 30 years later, the book has reached 15 million people around the world, from Russia to China to Japan to France, and even, if you can believe it or not, even in Portugal.
Even in the backwaters of Portugal, where I am. That's amazing. Well, and it also reflects how far we've come as a collective.
Yes.
As when in the 90s, it's going to be put out as a fiction and people are thinking you're crazy. Whereas with GodTalk, the publisher is contacting you for everybody to share their stories, and you have hundreds of people applying. It shows that we're much more open to these kind of conversations. But for anyone that's listening to this, that perhaps feels inspired to read your book or to make the first step in their conversations with God, where would you get them to start?
Well, I think, the first step in my 6-step process, which, by the way, it wasn't a process that I actually used, consciously when I first had the experience. It's only when I looked back on it that I saw the steps that I kind of took intuitively. But when the publisher asked me, could I write that down? Yeah, I did. So the first step is what I call possibility. We have to agree with ourselves that it's possible, number one, that God actually exists. Not everyone believes that there is a God. So, of course, you can't have a conversation with God unless you think that God exists. And we also have to believe that it's possible that if God does exist, that God would actually talk to regular human beings, not just the Pope or the chief ulama or the head rabbi or the Archbishop of Canterbury, but that God would talk to, a plumber in Cincinnati or a woman in Portugal. So an ordinary person. So we have to embrace the possibility that God would talk directly to us. The second step is what I call worthiness. We have to believe that even if God does talk to the average person, that we are worthy to have God talk to us. Because if we think, no, I haven't really been that special of a person, I'm not horrible, but I'm not really a saint. And you have to be a guru or somebody at a saintly level, like, the Dalai Lama or somebody like that. So we have to embrace our own worthiness, to realize that we are worthy to be spoken to by God. Once we accept that we are, then we go to step number 3, which is willingness. We have to be willing to receive information from God. And you know why I say willingness, Sarah? Because most of the world's 4,000 religions teach us that if we say that God is talking directly to us, we will be blasphemers.
Yeah.
We will be heretics. We will be called apostates. We will be committing an ecclesiastical spiritual sin.
Yes.
To who would dare say, well, God is talking directly to me. So we have to be willing to overcome humanity's cultural bias against having a conversation with God. And that takes us to step number 4, which is wakefulness, as I mentioned a minute ago. If we are willing to receive the information and to have a conversation with God, we have to stay awake, because God's communications with us can come to us in 100 different ways across 1,000 different moments. The words on a billboard in the next corner when you turn the corner around on the highway. And those words could be just what you needed to hear about something you've been worried about or concerned about. Or, as I said a little while ago, the lyrics of the next song you hear on the radio. So stay awake, which takes us to step number 5, acceptance. Accept, don't reject, but accept the messages that you are receiving, because many people actually reject when they receive a message, especially if it's by coincidence, like I mentioned a minute ago, the chance utterance of a friend on the street or an overheard conversation in a coffee shop. That's, this actually happened to me. I was having a relationship challenge in my life, and I went to a coffee shop by myself to have some coffee, and I was worried about it. And the couple at the next table were having a discussion, a friendly discussion about a challenge they were having in their relationship. And I thought, and they were talking so loudly, and I thought, my God, they could be talking to me. This is unbelievable that I'm hearing this conversation. So, but I have to accept that, because there's no such thing as a coincidence.
It's definitely not. I had someone recently, I was talking with my brother about video editing, and he didn't know the answer. And someone chipped in from the next table.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly that, isn't it?
And there's no such thing as a coincidence.
No.
Which takes us to the last step number 6, which is discernment. To be able to discriminate between what really are conversations from God and, messages that we're now receiving from so many other sources, the internet, social media, the events of our life, so, like I'm walking down to my car in the parking lot. I'm leaving a restaurant. I'm going to my car in the parking lot. I reach into my pocket to get my car keys. And as I pull out my car keys, some paper money happens to fall out of my pocket and falls on the ground.
Yes.
It's a sign. It's a sign from God. I'm supposed to take all my money out of my pocket and throw it on the ground. No. Use discernment. Not everything is a sign.
I love that. And I think you spoke about the tummy test as well, that sense of,
yes.
Does this feel right? And some of some of the things that would never be messages from God, like self-harm or something like this. One of the things that I found really interesting about your book was that you talked about how some of the messages that came through were not in alignment with what you'd learned or what you'd heard. They kind of appeared completely out of left field in a way, some of the answers that you got.
Yes, many of the answers that I got. For instance, God told me, Neale, there's no such thing as right and wrong. I said, what? What? You can't tell me that. Of course there's right and wrong. And God said, give me an example of what you think is wrong. I said, hurting someone or even killing someone would be wrong. God said, if someone burst into your house and was going to steal your baby and went to your baby's room and took the baby out of the crib and going to walk out of the house with the baby, would you do anything to stop them? Would you even hurt them? I said, well, that's different. God said, no, see, there's no such thing as right and wrong. It's only what it is you're trying to do and the way in which you're doing it. So I had to recontextualize. I had to recreate my understanding of right and wrong, and to
So it's the
understand.
intention. It's the intention.
Yeah, and the purpose.
It's not
the
the
purpose.
action, it's the intention. Is that what you're saying?
Precisely. And so, and I'm just giving you an example of one of the many statements that were made in conversations with God that contradicted what I had been taught as a child.
Yes.
So, and there were many of those other statements very much like that. For instance, God said to me, Neale, there's no such thing as the Ten Commandments. Again, I said, what? Everybody knows the Ten Commandments. And God said, who would I command? We are all one. Sweetheart, you are a part of me. Who would my right hand tell my left hand what to do? And if my left hand didn't do it, my right hand slaps the left hand? Would I slap myself, injure myself, punish myself? I said, well, of course I didn't understand that we're all part of God. And God said, there is only one thing, Neale. It's called divinity, and it resides in every sentient being in the cosmos. So the Ten Commandments were ideas that you guys down there had. You chose to decide that God is a person who says, these are the things that I command. And if you don't do as I command, I will send you to hell. But that is not how a God of pure love actually behaves. So I wound up writing another book as well called The God Solution. And the book, The God Solution, is a solution to our personal and our global problems by redefining God and deciding that we have, in fact, made a huge mistake about who we think that God is and how we think that God behaves. Oh, and by the way, anyone who wants a copy of The God Solution can get one from me, a digital copy. They just send me an email and say, Neale, send me a digital copy of the author's manuscript, and I'll email it back to them. They just send it to my email address. By the way, my email address is impossible to forget.
Would you like me to pop it underneath in the description, Neale, so people can contact you?
Yeah, my email address is very simple. Neale@nealedonaldwalsch.com.
I'll put it underneath in case people haven't got the spelling, but yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So yes, I was told many things in my dialogue with the divine that contradicted what I was told as a child.
And I know that in GodTalk, you spoke about really encouraging us to have conversations about God, because we've been taught, haven't we? Just don't talk about religion, don't talk about politics. But actually, by having these conversations, we can start to redefine and perhaps find more unity between.
Yes, I am encouraging people not only to have conversations with God, but to have conversations about God. We need to have a global conversation with all the people of the earth about who and what we think God is and what God wants. I wrote a book once titled What God Wants. And chapter 9 of that book describes in detail everything that God wants. Chapter 9 is 14 pages, blank. 14 blank pages.
Beautiful.
And then chapter 10, I say to people, I know you can't believe that. I know you think that there are all kinds of things that God wants. But why would the most powerful entity in the universe need anything from you? Do you demand anything of your 18-month-old baby or your 2-year-old child? And we are the same thing in relationship to God, because God sees us as 2-year-olds for a very good reason, because many people in the human race are acting like 2-year-olds. So what does God need from 8.5 billion people who are acting like 2-year-olds? Nothing at all. And what does God desire? God desires that we each use our own power to create reality in a way that changes things for the better. It's as simple as that.
Creators. And that's really what you're speaking to is it God or is it our imagination? Does it really matter? You know, was one of the things that you mentioned in your book, because we can dismiss so much by saying, oh, it's just imagination.
I asked God.
It was amazing that you held your position of saying this is not fiction, or is it?
Well, I asked God that question. I said, how do I know that this is not just all my imagination? And God said to me, Neale, what makes you think that I would not use your imagination as one of my tools to communicate? Where do you suppose, God said to me, where do you suppose Mozart's music came from? Where do you suppose Michelangelo's art came from? Where do you suppose so many of the world's great inventions and discoveries came from, if it's not from your imagination? You even have a famous songwriter and a famous singer who wrote a song called Imagine. I think it was John Lennon.
I think it might be.
So, you know what? God said to me, use your imagination as one of your many tools that bring forth unimaginable joy.
Beautiful. That feels like a really powerful way to finish the podcast, Neale. But I am going to ask you one last question. Do you have any last words, or if your readers had one takeaway from the GodTalk book, what would you like that to be?
Your life is not about you. It's about everyone whose life you touch and the way in which you touch it. But when you realize that, you experience that in the universal sense, your life is about you for an elegant reason. There's only one of us in the room. There's nobody else here but different versions of you. We are all one. And we are even one with God. And those few people who have understood that on this planet have changed the world.
I'm speechless. I feel like I can't say anything to other than just to leave it with that, because that was just so incredibly powerful and poignant. Thank you so much. I'm so immensely grateful. I'm really moved as well, Neale. Thank you. And I do hope all the listeners at home that you've really got a lot out of this podcast today as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. It was very kind of you to allow me to join you and to share these ideas with your audience. Blessings.
Many blessings. Thank you.